Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of Be Bullish. One of the strong voices which has supported Mr. Modi and his policies which he adopted in Gujarat has been Dr. Arvind Panagria. Dr. Panagria, who is the professor of economics at Columbia University, has spoken out openly before on what needs to be done to fix India's growth problems. He thinks Mr. Modi is the best suited person to actually get India back to the 8 to 10% growth range, which he thinks can be done in 2 years' time. Eventually, he says Mr. Modi should target growth rates in excess of 10%, maybe 11%. My colleague Namrata Brar caught up with Dr. Arvind Panagria in this exclusive conversation, and that's the first voice here on this edition of Be Bullish.
Mr. Modi has spoken about China being an inspiration for him, that he wants to get India into the superpower status of China. How is he going to do this? His promise of building 100 new cities, promise of building freight corridors and bullet trains. Is it all going to come in despite the fact that he is saying that we will protect some of those welfare schemes, the subsidy schemes like NREGA, which were instituted by the UPA government? So on one side, some of the subsidies are going to be protected, and the fact is we get only 3% of our entire population paying income tax. So where are the revenues going to come in from?
No, that's a million-dollar question, Namrata. So this will have to be phased out. Obviously, you can't start building bullet trains right away. But let me try to build a scenario that, first of all, at least initially, one can begin by building some of the infrastructure. In particular, road construction needs to be speeded up, highways. Electricity, I think that can be done with relatively limited resources. Good progress can be made because a lot of investment has happened, but because the lack of availability of coal or gas, the generation has been low, and as a result we have very low capacity utilization. If you look at the plant load factors, they've been very low. So some of these things can be done. Some revenues can also be freed up through ending some of the subsidies which are clearly not going to the poor. They're not part of our social programs. Things like diesel and petrol subsidies. I think these can be ended by simply unifying the price of petrol and diesel to the market price, so you gain substantial revenues there. I think we could also, UPA government had actually reduced the number of subsidized gas cylinders, cooking gas cylinders from 9 to 6, but then as election came forward, they raised it back to 9. I think we can go back to 6, so that also does free up some part of the revenue. So these are the ways, broaden the tax base, although that may be not in the very first year. But those are the kinds of things to do, get the process going. But ultimately, I think the biggest source of revenue has to be higher growth. I mean, the only reason the UPA was able to expand social programs so rapidly is because the growth, particularly during UPA 1, had been 8 to 9%. And that is how you raise the revenue. So ultimately, Mr. Modi will need to do everything to push the growth back to not even 8, 9, but perhaps 10, 11%. It's doable.
By when?
Well, if we do the right things, I think in the first year, so 14, 15, we should be able to push to 6.5%. Following 2 years, we can push it to 8, and after that, I think we can begin to push towards the double digit. I think it's doable.
Will there be simplification in the state-run banks as well? The PSUs, do you feel there's privatization in that coming very soon?
I think you see now both at this stage, from trying to just judge by the interviews that Mr. Modi had given during the campaign, my sense is that he believes more in professionalization of the PSUs than I think in outright sales of the PSUs. For sure, compulsion for revenues will certainly lead to some dilution of the public sector equity in these. but whether he would actually outright privatize, I think remains to be seen. Banks is an interesting case, of course. Banks currently, public sector banks are are suffering from certain weaknesses because of very large volume of non-performing loans and restructured loans. They are almost 10% now of the total loans. And I think their action would be required. So again, I have argued in terms of 2 or 3 instrumentalities and use them in combination rather than rely on only one. And these are that, some of the revenues get used to recapitalize the banks, but also some dilution happens of the public equity in the banks so that the banks can then raise equity from the market. So that kind of does bring them a little bit another step closer to eventual privatization if that's what the government finally decides to do. And third, of course, some of the banks are some of the specific banks are in much worse shape, where the restructured loans and non-performing assets easily exceed 15%. There, I think, the government could take the opportunity to consolidate banking system by merging some of these weaker banks with some of the stronger banks. Though not the State Bank of India, which is already very large. What we want is the creation of, through consolidation, creation of another few larger banks, and the current weaknesses of some certain banks provides a good opportunity to do that.
Okay, the other focus has been energy, road, ports, gas and rail. This is something that everyone's been talking about. But in terms of coal privatization, there have been some rumors doing the round, including a possible breakup of Coal India. Do you feel the mandate will push that through?
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect that privatization actually will happen, but coal is an area like railways that Mr. Modi places a very high priority on, and he repeatedly talked during his campaign that here was coal sitting under the mines, under the ground, and here was excess capacity among the electric generation companies with a very low plant load factor, and here the nation was in dark. So it is graphically used to put that way. So I think coal is a major priority for him, and because ultimately that's the road to electricity goes through coal. So he would certainly want to do something, and clearly breaking up Coal India is one of the steps that he needs to take. But he'll also need to build some railway lines. I'm told that there are coal mines where output can be increased very rapidly. These are mines, I think in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand and Odisha, and apparently all you need is, but these are isolated, a bit far out, so there's no transportation means for coal to be brought. But according to the reports that I've seen, about 300 kilometers of railway is all you need to build. So that also ought to be built fast. And apparently these reports suggest that very quickly you can raise coal output by almost 300 million tons. So that's a huge, huge hike over our current production. So I think all those steps ought to be taken, and that really gets us going on the electricity front, and we can begin to take electricity to more and more households, particularly in, again, 2 states which really are very far behind on this front are Bihar and UP.
You've also endorsed, Professor Panagria, the candidature, or the continuation rather, of Governor Raghuram Rajan as the chief of the RBI. Now, some people compare a Modi-Rajan team as a Reagan-Volcker team, and there are others who say the mandates are completely different. Governor Rajan is focused on 9% plus inflation, he's focused on hiking rates, and Mr. Modi is focused on creating jobs and spurring growth. How do the two meet?
Well, I'm not a macroeconomist, but my personal bottom line really on this is that I'm hard pressed to think of a better governor of the central bank than Mr. Rajan. Insofar as the possibility of a conflict between Mr. Modi and Mr. Rajan, I personally don't think that that's likely, because both ultimately are interested. I mean, there's no chance that Mr. Rajan would not be interested in creating jobs and promoting growth. What is the precise right way to do it? There may be differences on that. but I don't think there's going to be any difference on the objectives. And if he's fighting inflation, let's say, more focus on inflation, it is perhaps because he believes that ultimately without breaking the back of inflation, growth will be actually compromised, and therefore employment job creation will be compromised. So I think the two and Mr. Modi's finance minister, I think they'll all work as a team, and I have no doubt that if Mr. Modi and his finance minister feel that the course pursued by Mr. Rajan is not the right one, I think they will engage in a dialogue with Mr. Rajan and convince him, or Mr. Rajan will convince them. So it's not an issue of conflict, it's an issue of coming together and understanding what is the right course of policy for the country.
So do you think it's going to be a Narendra Modi, Arun Shuri and Raghuram Rajan team?
That I don't know. That's a good team, if that's your question.
Is that your dream team?
It'll be a good team. It'll be a good team. I mean, I have great respect for Arun Shuri, and great respect for Raghuram Rajan, and of course, I admire greatly Mr. Modi.
That was Dr. Panagria in conversation with my colleague Namrata Brar. We're going to take a very quick break here, and when we come back, we've got two important market voices joining in. We'll start with Sashi Krishnan, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Birla Sun Life Insurance. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're with us here on this Friday edition of Be Bullish. Sashi Krishnan is Chief Investment Officer at Birla Sun Life Insurance, and he believes that reforms which Mr. Modi and his team will unleash over the next many years will essentially power what he sees as a multi-year bull market. That conversation coming right up. Sashi Krishnan is Chief Investment Officer at Birla Sun Life Insurance, who's with us here in our studios. So I think we're talking for the first time after the NDA victory.
Yeah.
We've spoken before. You've sounded pretty bullish about the prospects for the economy and for the market. You've been constructive. What's your view now? Because I think the verdict for the NDA beat all expectations by a margin.
Great. I think for asset markets, we are now going to see a paradigm shift in the expectations. And more importantly, I think the sentiment of investors, I mean both the institutional investors and the retail investors, has clearly changed significantly for the better. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. I think the first reason is political stability, because if you go back, maybe for the last almost decade or slightly more than a decade, India was run by coalition governments, and we very often heard that a lot of the reform process, a lot of the economic reforms that needed to be done were primarily getting held up because of coalition compulsions. With the kind of mandate that has been given to the NDA government at this point of time, the expectation is that these kind of pressures will clearly not exist, and that the kind of political stability necessary to push forward economic reforms is clearly there, and it will happen. That's, I think, one. I think the second important thing is, the reform cycle itself, because there is a greater expectation, especially seeing the manifestos of, the BJP, that there is going to be a focus on the reform process. There is going to be a focus on reviving the investment cycle. There is going to be a focus on getting through a lot of, let us say, complex, reforms that are needed, especially on the tax side and all that. Thirdly, I think, is fiscal stability. And I think fiscal stability is very, very important for us over the next couple of years, because we did see a large number of years in the last few years where there was a lot of social spending, and that put and subsidies that put pressure on the fisc, and that, I think, is another area where markets believe that a lot will happen. And lastly, I think the country risk for India has come down significantly. I mean, till very recently, maybe about a year back, I mean, there was this big fear that India was, a potential downgrade, with the current account deficit number being so bad, the fisc out of control, growth falling to 4.5%. India was, a potential downgrade candidate. Right now, I think, that fear has subsided significantly. And, people do believe that, India is no longer, a potential downgrade candidate. And that is getting reflected in, for example, the way the rupee has been behaving, you know, the way it has appreciated so significantly in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So I think on the whole, asset markets are, you know, definitely a lot more confident at this point of time, and the expectation is that for the next couple of years, you should see, you know, asset markets gain in value.
But the view is turning out to be one of a very strong bull market which will run for many years, right? If you're in the market, I'm sure, Mr. Krishnan, you can't really escape that narrative, which I think is coming down very strongly from all quarters. I think the comfort is that Mr. Modi and his team now they've got the time, so there is no here and there, right? So it's a coalition, no need for that, right? They've got a strong mandate in that sense. So there is that sense of comfort. Is it well deserved, well justified, you think?
Yeah, I think it is well justified because there is no reason, for example, there's no reason to believe why growth can't sort of get back very quickly. So today we are at a 4.5% GDP growth. You know, we need to get back immediately in 2014-15 to a 5.5% GDP growth to give this sense of confidence to the asset markets that things are on the right track.
Yeah.
And to get back to 5.5% from 4.5%, in my opinion, is not a very tall task. There are almost $150 billion worth of projects that are stuck. And they're stuck for a variety of reasons which all of us know, whether they're environmental clearances or they're forest clearances or their lack of power or lack of coal. And I think all they need to do, it doesn't need any kind of legislative action, it doesn't need any kind of, inter-party coordination.
Yeah.
All it needs is, you know, a bit of interministerial coordination to debottleneck this $150 billion worth of projects that are stuck. And if you can debottleneck, you know, 50-75% of this very quickly, then adding 100 basis points to growth is not a very, very tall task.
Yeah.
So getting from 4.5 to 5.5%, I think, is not really the big task.
Yeah.
And I think the new government, we're well into before it's even taken charge, is seized of this fact and seems to be, you know, working towards that. At least the BJP and the spokespersons that we hear seem to be working towards that. Saying that, you know, we'd like to review a lot of the projects that were stuck, understand why they were stuck, see what is it that we could do to sort of get them rolling. And that, I think, is a very, very positive step.
Yeah.
I think the second step, which has to...
No, just let me come in here. So, as you said, and I agree, 4.5 to 5, 5.5, 6 is not that tough, right? But I think the narrative again is that, well, Mr. Modi will be able to effect a permanent change in the trend rate of growth to above 7%.
Right.
And we're going to stay there. Do you buy that? And I mean, it'll happen in the next year and a half or so.
Yeah, that's actually the very important question because our decadal average has been 7%. There are years we have grown significantly more than 7%, but we need to get back to that 7%. I think that's a very, very well taken sort of argument that you have. Now, how do we get back to that 7%? And I think markets are going to watch that very carefully. So if you're looking at a multi-year bull market, markets necessarily need to see that, no, we can get quickly from 5.5% in 2014-15 to closer to 7% by 16, and, you know, signs that this 7% and better will sustain over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple of things that necessarily need to be done out there where this can come from. I think the first is tax reform. You know, if you can get the GST rolling, and I think this has been oft discussed on your own channel, you know, this itself can add 50 basis to 100 basis points to...
Permanently, right? That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. So that gets us to about 5.5%, right?
So from 5.5% where we are, if we can unstuck a lot of projects, we could go to something like 6.5%. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, fair enough.
Now, but that is a permanent change, as you rightly said, and that's something that is going to make a multi-year difference. But from there to 7.5% is where we need to see the real reforms coming in. We need to see, you know, infrastructure and manufacturing, actually, these two areas pick up substantially. We need to see a lot more investment flowing into manufacturing. We need to see a lot more investment flowing into the infrastructure sector. And this is where I think, you know, we need to very carefully look at, you know, the capital account and the current account. Because if you look at, you know, the developed countries, especially the US, Japan and Europe, corporate US today has got a huge amount of cash lying on their balance sheets, close to something like 2.5% of their GDP lying on their balance sheets. And all that money is looking for places to invest, right? they need a right environment, they need the right policies.
They need demand. They need demand.
Yeah,
Basically, they
see,
need demand, right?
right,
That
right.
demand has to be created.
Yeah, this is
Which
the-
gets me to my next question, especially in India, in the Indian context, right? How do you create demand? How do you get demand? You get
Correct.
demand. The biggest spender is the government of India.
Right.
Can the government of India spend and get demand back? Most will agree, well, that's the way to go, but most will also say that they don't have very much wiggle room, right? They can't really spend their way out as other countries have when they've had a real demand problem. So where is the demand going to come from? That's the question. US firms have got record amount of cash on the books, but they won't spend to set up new facilities, manufacturing plants, etc., because there is lack of demand. Very simple, right? It might go outside the US, but where's the demand here?
Right. So yeah, you're you have a very valid point out there. If you look at demand growth in the US, it's been less than 2%. So obviously there is a challenge for them to sort of look for demand in their own domestic markets and set up capacities or invest for that demand in those markets. And therefore, I think they necessarily need to look outwards.
Yeah.
And if they look outwards,
Yeah.
I think they're going to look at a couple of things. One is that clearly this is an economy of 1.25 billion people. So there is a latent demand that is already
Demographics
there.
plays
the
a very
demographics
very
itself is
strong,
a very,
absolutely,
very strong
absolutely.
reason why they should be
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
But more important than demographics is the fact that if you look at a lot of how this demand creation happened in the domestic economy, one was obviously government spending, but it was also a lot of social spending that put more money into the rural pockets.
Yeah, which is government spending again, which is effectively government
and
spending.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think there has to be a shift in the way we look at things. That's why creating jobs becomes one of the most key things that this new government has to do. So it necessarily needs to create jobs so that either through the private sector or through the government sector, so that you can then sort of push up domestic demand. The second thing is you need to encourage entrepreneurship, because if you can encourage entrepreneurship, you've got a lot of new sort of new businesses being set up, and new businesses on their own will start generating demand. So I think we need to look at beyond demographics, we need to look at more and more permanent solutions to push up this demand.
Yeah.
But coming back to the first point, if you look across the world, there are not too many places where this money can move to sort of create new capacities. And therefore today India is actually in a very, very sweet spot. And given the fact that country risk has come down significantly, I think and people at least have a line of sight for the next 5 years, if not a little more, saying that we know that there's going to be stability for the next 5 years, and you'll have policy continuity. I do believe that there will be a lot of money that can come into both infrastructure and manufacturing. And that, I think, is going to add that next 100 basis points to take it to 7.5. Right?
Okay.
So beyond 7.5, obviously, is the reform process itself. And I mean, that's a fairly tricky area to sort of negotiate, even for a government with an absolute majority, because you will have issues that will relate to, say, FDI and retail. You will have issues relating to disinvestment. If they can create consensus and create public opinion that favors these kind of things, I think then you will see the next move beyond 7.5%, which could lead us to these multi-year bull markets which you were talking about.
Yeah. So I just coming back to the market and what the market is anticipating, right? So there's no doubt that Mr. Modi essentially wants the end result, which he wants is a much higher rate of growth.
Right.
The market has a certain narrative in its mind in terms of how he is going to go about getting to that higher rate of growth, much higher rate of growth.
Right.
It believes the Gujarat model will be implemented, land acquisition will be very easy for corporates, manufacturing incentives will be given to India Inc., much friendlier policies generally, much faster, quicker decision making, time-bound decision making and things like that. That may well happen. But is it possible that he pursues a different path to getting to that higher rate of growth? So he pursues a path where he first will want to control inflation, reduce debt leverage in the economy by whatever means, right? Which it could mean writing off and things like that as well. Basically lay the foundations for a much more sustainable path ahead and not immediately get to those things which the market is expecting. Do you think that is possible? And the only reason I'm asking that question is that he's got 283 seats, right? And that is quite a mandate. So he might just decide to sort of, do what he thinks is right for a more sustainable growth path and not immediately do the things which market is betting on. I mean, the end result, I guess, would be similar, but the path and the time taken for both would be different. What's your sense?
Yeah, I think, if you ask me, this is a difficult question because it cannot be either or. I mean, and that's my first observation. You have to work for some quick gains, because unless you work for these quick gains in sort of debottlenecking, quick gains in showing that you can move from 4.5% to 5.5% in terms of growth,
right,
you can't move business sentiment. Right? And I think business sentiment is as important to economic growth as, for example, the rest of the things that you talked about in terms of inflation, in terms of bringing down interest rates. So, I mean, if the way I would look at it is, I'm sure he's going to work for those quick gains immediately. But therefore, the first step in terms of debottlenecking, in terms of getting interministerial coordination, all this will happen. But you're right. I mean, for a longer term sustained growth, it is very, very important that we focus on inflation, we focus on deleveraging, we focus on reducing.
No, because would you
rates.
agree that the outcomes, market outcomes for the two scenarios that I laid out are very different? So the outcome of the first, which is immediately going after the things which the market wants, is maybe you get a bull market, Nifty gets to, as many are saying, 15,000 in 3 years, 4 years. So it's boom and then maybe a big contraction once again, right? But if you do the latter, you basically get to a more sustainable market, and you don't again get that. The basic difference is building on debt, more debt, and then you get those big boom and busts, right? On the other hand, if you tackle the problem now, you get a more sustainable path ahead. Do you agree the outcomes are different?
You see, the way I would look at it is that you can't do one to the exclusion of the other. You necessarily have to do both.
You're saying both will have to be done at
both
the
will
same
have to
time.
be done.
Fair enough.
So I think the way this will be approached is you could start tackling what are the low hanging fruits, the immediate debottlenecking.
Right.
But having said that, I think you made a very, very important point. It is important that we focus on inflation. It is important that we focus on deleveraging. It is important that we focus on lowering interest rates. And I think a lot of this can actually follow. Even if you take the first step of quick wins and debottlenecking, because if market sentiment improves, for example, there will be a lot of people who will be able to access capital markets, raise money, deleverage their balance sheet, right, and then improve their ability to go back and borrow for new expansion. Secondly, I think if you look at inflation, like if you can bring about these reforms which we are talking about in the agricultural sector, in terms of distribution, etc. I mean, you will see this trend of inflation moving down from 8% to 6% accelerate. I think the RBI is very clear in its mind that it should get to 6% by 2016, 17. And once we get to that 6%, I think it's a lot more easier for us to talk about sustained lower interest rates in the economy, which in my opinion will be will start boosting up the investment cycle. So I think both of these are going to happen. You need a set of quick wins to improve business sentiment, but you need to do the right things in terms of improving macro to ensure that this is a sustainable recovery over the long period of time.
Mr. Krishnan, thanks very much for dropping by. Appreciate your time. It's a pleasure, as always. Good chat. Thank you. Okay, let's flip into a short break. We are coming right out with Sanjay Sinha, who's, of course, managed money for a long time, his thoughts on the market, and, of course, some stock ideas.